Welcome back to another Read and Correct from me, Kindar, the Tiger Lights, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. These are where I read a chapter from one of my stories and correct it as I go. If you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch, and if you want to support me, that is on my Patreon. Today we are doing chapter 36 of A Series of Death. Derrimack, Trembor called as he saw her heading for her instead of his office. Have you heard anything back? She shook her head. You know how they are about underage bodies. Anytime information leaks, the newsies make a production of the death. Also, that sleek-old person has been threatening to eat some of them because a certain someone went and visited her suspect. He's my brother, Trembor stated. As far as he was concerned, that outweighed any complaint Sleekcoat had. Doesn't mean it didn't piss her off and that she's dumping all that on them since she can't threaten the person who helped you. Thanks for trying. The idea that Mink trying to yell at Bahamel didn't help raise his mood. He needed evidence that had been he needed the evidence that had been collected if he wanted a chance of proving Bo hadn't done this. Hey, villain! Trembor greeted the newt, opening his arm for her. Trembor! She ran in them for a hug. Where have you been hiding yourself these last years? She punched his shoulder. What happened to those times you'd be down here every other day to talk? Did you bring me meat? I became an RI and my office moved away from here, he answered with a chuckle. He took out a bag with small pieces of meat in it. Villain was a slim female with molted brown and black skin who worked in the forensic lab. Way I heard it, you've been back for a few weeks now, she said, trying to sound severe, but her eyes were on the bag. I really shouldn't, you know that, right? She snatched it out of his hand before he could pull it away. You are such a tempter, she moaned as she chewed the piece. Oh, I miss this. No one brings me treats like you do. Others have to know you like meat. Sure, but they're too concerned about my health to bring me any. I have to buy my own, and it's never as good as what someone gives me. She smiled at him. Everyone knows a little indulgence is a good thing. Feeling alive comes with risk, and that's just the way things are. She popped another piece in her mouth. Just don't eat them too quickly. You know how sick you can get from unprocessed protein. She eyed him suspiciously. You ever ate the processed scrapped? Are you kidding? They're stamping the stuff into resembling meat now, trying to convince us it's better than stocking our own meal. The lion shuddered. I'm a predator. I'm going to kill my meat until the law says I can't anymore. You're going to keep doing that. You're going to keep going even after that, she said with a smile, carefully closing the bag. You predators need the chase as much as you need the meat. What can I do for you? I'd like to know what they collected on the case regarding Bolafin Goldenmane. I wonder the name seemed familiar. She tightened her lips. I can't tell you anything. I'm sorry. Villain, he's my brother. I can't let that sleek-coat female bungle this. She's going to twist any piece of evidence she can to cut my brother as deep as possible. She's more interested in closing the case than making sure she has the right person. She sat at her desk, and when Trembor moved to stand next to her, she motioned for him to go on the other side of the desk, where he couldn't see the screen. I don't know what I'll be able to tell you, she typed and quickly read. Her facial skin lost some of its sheen, and Trembor knew that wasn't a good sign. She looked up at the screen. She looked up from the screen. It's bad. What are you talking about? How bad can it be? Bo didn't do this. The evidence says he did. No, that's just that mink twisting thing. She shook her head. I'm looking at the lab reports. Those are going to be sent to her once the last few details have been cleared up. He stared at her. They're wrong. Bo wouldn't hurt a cub. He didn't even need to hunt. He has plenty of meat in his cooler. I'm sorry, Trembor. The lab doesn't concern itself with why someone does what they did. That's the counselor's job. He reached for the screen and she batted his hand away. There was no strength in it, but it reminded him there were rules he had to follow. He cursed, and she squeezed his arm comfortingly. Trembor angrily terminated another dead-end call. He'd gone through everyone he knew, everyone he thought were his friend, and not one of them would tell him tell or let him see the evidence that had been compiled against his brother. They'd have fur. They would have, too, since the body was found in Beau's house. As neat as his brother was, it was impossible to remove your fur from where you lived. They'd also find Erelek's and his ensign's fur. If they looked hard enough, they'd find blood from all three. Even Esenson was probably learning to prep bodies despite his young age. That meant accidental bleeding. He cursed, and cursed again when he realized this would be where the wolf would mention he could get information for him. He wouldn't even have to use one of his criminals' contact. He'd just hack into the forensics lab's computer, get what Trembor wanted, and not even question his reason. That was how much Marlot... No, that had just been an act, he reminded himself. Some sick game to get him comfortable with breaking the law. He rested his head on his hands. He wanted to scream. He wanted to run out and claw anyone, until they told him what he wanted to know. It was clear now no one was interested in helping his brother. His family was counting on him to get Beau out of this. Without Trembor getting in the information, he knew Beau would be handed over to the cub's family without even a proper investigation. They'd rip him apart, eat him, and once someone realized the evidence had shown he was innocent afterward, well, what good would that do his brother then? It was obviously a setup. Beau had to have pissed off his so-called friends at the gambling house. It was the only thing that made sense. He stood. If criminals were involved, what was he doing letting the law hinder him? They didn't care about it, he cursed. He couldn't bring himself down to their level. Trembor put a hand on his desk, his claws digging into the wooden surface. He wouldn't go down to their level, would not lie and plant evidence. He was going to do what was needed to find the truth and nothing more. The scents permeating the bar were that of cheap but potent alcohol, blood, sweat, and a variety of smoke stick. This was nothing like Elnard's bar, and he hated it. He wouldn't be here if it wasn't the place the female he'd contacted had picked. He'd even tried to get her to choose something more respectable, but she'd laughed. She'd picked it especially because he didn't like it. He located the bison in a booth at the far side of the bar. Of course, she'd force him to cross the place. He was going to have to burn his clothes once he got home. She watched him approach, a mix of amusement and suspicion on her face. He sat opposite her. He noticed a thin and nervous-looking hedgehog sitting next to her. So, is this a setup? She asked. Trembor shook his head. Speak up. She indicated the pad on the table, actively recording. You know the courts don't accept gestures. He glared at her. It's not a setup, Jasper. He wished it was. That would make being here more palatable. She beamed. As I live and breathe, the mighty Trembor Goldenmane wants to do business with the likes of me. She canted her head. How many times did you try to arrest me? I arrested you 16 times, he replied angrily. There was no trying involved. You just managed to get the witnesses to recant their testimonies. I did no such thing, she replied, her eyes wide and tone hurt. I know you aren't the one who got them to lie. You'd rather let a pack of hyenas eat you than bend the rules. But you aren't the only ones involved in the whole You weren't the only one involved in the whole investigation. Yeah, in the investigations. Were you? It isn't my fault that by the time I made it to court, they decided to do the right thing and tell the truth. Can we stop this? Trembor demanded, rubbing his temple. We both know you made sure they were paid to say you weren't involved, and days after you went free, they got eaten. Did you ever trace payment to me? He glared at her. I'm not an enforcer anymore, Jasper. I'm not even trying to get you to admit anything. You're the one bringing it up, rubbing how you got away with it in my face. I just want to get this done with and never see you again. He nodded to the hedgehog, who shrank in on himself at being acknowledged. Who's that? My brother. She answered in a tone that made it clear she didn't want him asking more about that. Trembor tilted an ear. And he's here why? You said you have computer problems. You know what? That's not my thing. I'm a management kind of female. My brother, on the other hand, now, him, you can hand over a computer broken in pieces, and he's going to return you a fully functioning one. Can you hack into the Enforcer database? Trevor asked the hedgehog, figuring they were past the point of stalking around the prey. The hedgehog's eyes grew wide. Why do you want to go in there? Why do you want him to go in there? The bison asked. From what I gather, you're back working in the precinct. I'm an RI, not an officer, which means that I can only access the evidence base database on cases I'm working. What do you need? The hedgehog asked, his voice soft and shaking. A copy of every lab report on one specific case. That means the forensic database, he said, looking at the table, and Trevor had to strain to make out what he said. It's better protected. They don't like it when we go in there and mess with the information. Does that mean you can't do it? Trevor did his best to keep the annoyance buried, but he didn't put it past Jasper to waste his time in retribution. It means it's going to cost you, the bison asked. The bison said. How much? A smile formed on her muzzle, finger tapping a rhythm on the table. I'd be open to discussing an ongoing arrangement. No, this is a one-time thing. You tell me how much, I pay, you get me what I want, and we never see each other again. And just to be clear, you tried to blackmail me with that recording, and I'm going to eat the both of you. I don't do blackmail, Lion. You, of all people, know that. She indicated the recording pad. That's for my protection, because the Lion I used to know would never do business with someone like me. You've changed, and that means I have to be careful. Tremor ground his teeth. This wasn't him having changed. It was him dealing with an extreme circumstances. I'm not going to discuss what a protection racket is, he said. So how much? She told him, and he had trouble keeping the surprise from showing. He was going to have to eat a smaller portion for a while to cover that. Maybe also avail himself of the meat the precinct brought in if they offered it again. At least Marlot had shown him how to go about getting physical currency without raising flags in the system. I'm going to need a day to get that much. Her ears straightened. You know how to get hard cash? She smiled knowingly. Do you have some need I should help you with? Tremor glared at her and she chuckled. Bro, can you get him what he wants by the time he brings the payment? The hedgehog shook his head. It isn't enough for me to risk getting caught, he whispered, eyes on the table, at least a week. Jasper smiled. So do you want this done faster? I'll give you a discount on account of our previous working relationship and all that. A week. As much as he wanted this to be over sooner rather than later, what she was already asking for nearly wiped out his budget. She'd want an ongoing relationship to cover the rest. He was sure Marlot would have tricks to deal with her, counter offers, maybe even information he could blackmail her with to keep things reasonable. But even if Trembor had access to any of that, he was a law-abiding male. He wasn't playing the criminal game. At least unless Slickcoat. At least unless Slickcoat has ways to pressure a judge, it would take time for both cases to process through the court system. It was one of the major complaints his father had about the legal system. It was slow, and with the evidence being so tightly wrapped, no enforcer should think they could afford to eat his brother. He'd still see about getting people he trusted to protect him, so a week was doable. Realistically, Bo was looking at 2, maybe 3 weeks with a good lawyer running interference. Durham would see to it Bo had a good one. Trevor stood. I'll be back tomorrow with your money. Don't sound so disappointed, Jasper said. Everyone gets dirt in their fur. It'll wash right out. Trevor shuddered at the image. He'd already felt dirty from the deal and the bar scent that clung to him. Any more, and he'd have to shave his fur for any chance of that feeling clean again. And that concludes chapter 36. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to know when the chapter is going to be, and the next chapter is going to be up, subscribe and hit the bell. If you want to read the book as well as the others in the series, they are available at all major e-retailer. If you want a different way to support me, that is on my Patreon, where you can also get access to just about everything else I've written. And if you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. The links are in the notes, and with that, I shall wish you a good day.